Hi, folks. Good to see everyone. Well, I don't see you yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing everybody over the next few days. I'm Rick Byers, as Sam said. I'm the engineering director for the Blink team at Google, and I started at Google 10 years ago to work on Chrome OS. I had some background on developer platforms and open source projects, and I wanted to combine those. And I really believe deeply in the power of open platforms to be a global force for good and economic prosperity. So I feel very privileged to get to be a leader on the Chrome team and contribute to the Chromium project. So I'm hoping to give you a big picture overview of Chromium and how we work together. And I intend to save a bunch of time at the end for questions. So please get your questions into Slido. I'm hoping we're going to have some great discussion there. So I'll caveat that this talk is almost certainly biased by my experiences and really only scratches the surface of what Chromium is. Hopefully others throughout the conference, you'll hear more perspectives throughout this conference and in future years as well from other folks who've been around for a while. Because really, Chromium isn't defined by a few leaders like myself. It's really defined by all of you and your contributions to the Chromium project. So to get started, I want to try to learn a little bit more about all of you. So there's a poll up on the Slido. Please fill it in, and we'll turn to that in a minute. But just before we do, we'll give it a minute for the results to accumulate. But we have some data from the registration form that I want to share. Sam covered a bunch of this already. That there's 643 registrants thereabouts across 60 different organizations. I'm excited how many different groups we have represented here. So just to name a bunch of them, I know Sam mentioned about 2/3 of the attendees are from Google. We've got about 100 people from Microsoft, which is great to see. And then we've got a handful of folks from a bunch of other organizations. And quite a few people filled in none or freelancer, which I love to see. But I think my favorite, right? Not everyone who's here necessarily works on Chromium for their job. A lot of people are here just because they love it and it's a hobby of theirs. I know I certainly, if I wasn't being paid to work on Chromium, I would try to figure out how to continue to do it just because I love it. And so my favorite organization that someone filled in was Browser Aficionado. I like that. So let's turn to the poll and see. I wanted to get a sense of what's the main reason why people are contributing to Chromium on this call. I think we have a big diversity of reasons to contribute. So if we can pull the poll up, please. Looks like we've got, as expected, a big fraction of contributors here are contributing code directly to the Chromium repo. That makes sense, but notice that it's not the majority. It's still like about 1/3 of contributors. Got a bunch of folks like me, I guess, who are just, at this point, more management and trying to help organize the project. And lots of other ways to contribute, right? Many of you, if you're new to the project, I know we've got a lot of community contributors who contribute a lot on the mailing lists and bug trackers. And even if you're not contributing code, the project needs all sorts of support in various areas. Even if you're just a user of Chromium, but you invest that extra time to submit really good bug reports or engage in the design process for how features could best help you in your use of the web, it's super valuable. So all sorts of ways to contribute to the project. All right, so before we get into the meat of the talk, I really have to apologize for the lack of production value in my talk. Sam asked me a couple weeks ago to do this, and my first thought was, yeah, sure, no problem. I'll take the keynote I gave for Chrome University last year, and I'll tweak it a little bit for Chromium University. And the more I worked on those tweaks, the more I realized I'd fallen into the traditional Googler trap of conflating Chrome and Chromium. And really, I had to basically start from scratch with these slides because Chrome and Chromium are very different things. Chrome, of course, is Google's web browser, and it's controlled by Google to serve Google's business interests. But Chromium is something different. And I bet those of you who work for companies like Samsung or Microsoft don't get these confused the way that Googlers do. So sorry about that. You'll notice even the template I used for my deck, I used the wrong logo. So let's, well, at least fix it here. Chromium, this is the Chromium logo. So what is Chromium? The simplest answer I think many of you would say is Chromium is an open source project for building a web browser, an open source project for a web browser. And yeah, that's true. And we often use Chromium to refer to the single Chromium repository or open source project. But really, more often when we say Chromium, we mean something bigger than that. So for example, there's a collection of closely related open source projects that are really all instrumental to being able to build a web browser, right? We know about the Chromium project, but there's the Chromium OS project. And of course, there's other pieces of Chromium that are really essential to the Chromium project, but are also used in other contexts as well. V8, for example, is our JavaScript and WebAssembly runtime, and it's also used by other projects like Node.js. Or Skia is the low-level graphics engine. It's also used inside of Android, but it's also a critical piece of Chromium and is really run as part of the overall umbrella of Chromium. And there's many other projects like that. In fact, if you go to chromium.googlesource.com, you'll see that there are 1,669 repositories listed as being managed there. Some of those, I think, I forget the number, about half of those are mirrored externally, but half of those are like Google-run open source projects that are really part of Chromium. Or if you look at the deps file in Chromium, you'll see all the other projects that building a full browser depends on. There's over 5,000 lines of text in our dependencies file. And that's just for Chromium, never mind Chromium OS, which is even bigger. And of course, there's a ton of open source tools that we rely on, many of which we've built from scratch for the sake of Chromium. There's Monorail, our bug tracker. There's a bunch of tools that are critical to our performance work, like Catapult and Trace Viewer, and just many, many more. So really, Chromium is bigger than just one open source project. It's really about the community and this larger effort to build a great open source browser. And even within the Chromium project, even within the Chromium repository, it's not really just a single project. There's multiple things there. So I just want to call out a few critical directories inside of the Chromium repository. First of all, there's the Chrome directory, which is really Chrome, and there's related parts in other directories that really serve as the application layer for Google Chrome. And it's very Google specific. For example, if you want to change how the UI looks in those directories, you're going to have to work with a Google employee who can go through Google internal UI review. And ultimately, the decisions of what the UI looks like in Chromium are up to Google and require a Google employee to approve. But other parts of the repository are different. If you look at content, content is really, content, all the other parts it depends on, is really an abstraction of the web platform, an implementation of the web platform in a multi-process sandbox. And it's more generic. We still don't allow code there that's like dead and unreachable. But in practice, the code here is more of a collaboration between multiple browsers. And there's several areas inside of content that have owners who can approve changes who aren't Google employees. And in particular, one critical piece of content is Blink. And that shows up under third-party Blink. It looks very different for historical reasons. It has a different license. A lot of the code is GPL in there instead of the BSD license. That's the rest of Chromium. And it's derived from the WebKit project, which is the rendering engine used by Safari and other browsers. And Google forked the WebKit project into Blink a few years back. So again, there's almost, you can think of a few separate projects, although again, related with highly overlapping goals inside of just one repository. And there's a huge number of consumers of Chromium. Right? We know, of course, of major browsers like Google Chrome and Microsoft Edge and Opera. But there's, if you check Wikipedia, Wikipedia lists 22 different active browsers built on top of Chromium. There's actually a lot more. If you go and take an Android device and search the Play Store for browsers, you'll find a lot of kind of niche or small usage browsers, most of which are built on Chromium. But Chromium is also used in application frameworks. So a lot of you probably heard of or know of Electron for building desktop applications using web technology. I put Android WebView in this category as well, because WebView is really a framework in Android for building Android applications that leverage web technology. But it's really special in that it's the one application framework that the Chromium project supports natively. We have bots that run tests for WebView. You're expected to not land patches that break WebView, that sort of thing. And I also called out a few of my favorite custom applications built on Chromium here, maybe with or without an application framework. First of all, I really like the story of Bloomberg terminals, which are used all over the world in financial settings. All that UI is apparently built on Chromium. And I like this story because despite it being a very special purpose application, Bloomberg has been a huge supporter of funding for Chromium in the web. CSS Grid wouldn't exist across the web the way it does today if Bloomberg hadn't hired a Gallia to go and build Grid out across all the browsers and invest in the standards and the tests and that sort of thing. So it's a great example of someone benefiting from the Chromium code base, but then contributing back and making the whole web better as a result of their even though their usage is really limited to a specific use case. I also like thinking about the SpaceX Dragon capsule and the UI on that running on Chromium. That's a good, it's a good reminder when I'm thinking about product quality and I'm wondering how much that bug really matters. You know, I picture an astronaut being frustrated. You know, of course, Chromium's impact is so much broader than, you know, a few astronauts using it, but still, it's a good reminder of just how important and impactful our decisions are when we make kind of quality trade-offs in the product. And also LG Smart TVs. LG has been a long time contributor to the Chromium project, has done a bunch of good work, and it's neat thinking of how every time you use an LG TV, all that UI is built on top of Chromium. And I'm sure there's many others. There's probably many I've missed here from folks on the call. If you want your project listed in this slide for the next time this talk is given, just email me and we'll get it added. Okay, so let's jump into a very brief history of Chromium. And really, I can't talk about the history of Chromium in isolation without talking about the history of Google Chrome. So you're going to see me jump to some slides with a little more production value. That's because I stole them from last year's talk. So first, Chrome got started in 2006. The team that started on Chrome was actually working on Firefox for a while. Ajax-heavy apps like Gmail and Google Maps were new, and lots more was happening client-side on the web, rather than just all the logic being on the server. And so demands on browsers were really increasing. But at the time, browsers were kind of unstable, you know, often slow, especially for these heavy applications, and they were easily compromised. Maybe, you know, easily might be a bit of a stretch, but browsers were being compromised in pretty serious ways pretty regularly. And so the team at Google was really inspired by these problems. And they also saw that Apple at the time was bringing Safari to Windows, which gave the team a chance to play with the WebKit engine, which Android was already using for building their browser. And so these early folks realized that there was really an opportunity to build our own browser as an expression of what they thought a browser could and should be. And then through that, have some positive influence on the broader web platform. Early on, Google built features like multi-process architecture and draggable tabs and the security sandbox. And of course, you know, key to the original design was regular updates, right? Updating Chrome very quickly. I don't know if many of you probably aren't as old as I am, but back then it was rare for a browser to get updates more often than a couple times a year. So Chrome was fairly radical in coming out and saying, was it it's 6 weeks now? I can't remember if it was 6 or 8 weeks then. But initially, the team thought that they're going to have to add a lot of flashy features so that they weren't just another Me Too browser. And they needed something, they felt they really needed something distinguishing that would distinguish Chrome from other browsers. And they tried all sorts of different things, but eventually realized that was really what was really distinguishing and important was having a browser that worked really, really fast and worked really, really well. And this simplicity is what actually ended up working well and differentiating Chrome. And so in September 2008, Chrome was released. And at the exact same moment, the open source Chromium project was announced and formed. And so as the team was thinking about what a high quality product meant, they came up with what we now refer to as the 4 S's, 4 core principles of the Chromium project. First, there's speed. We know that if we want people to have a great experience on the web, it's got to be fast. It's got to feel responsive. It's always been a core principle of everything we do in Chromium. Simplicity, right? Through lots of experimentation, we found over and over again that the simplest problem, the simplest design is often the best one. Chrome, the actual name Chrome, I don't know if you all know this history, the word Chrome refers to the UI around a web page, right? It's the browser Chrome. And so Chrome took the name Chrome as a bit of a pun on the idea that actually what really mattered was not the Chrome, it's not all the browser, it's actually the content. Content, not Chrome, is a common saying, especially among early Chrome team folks. And that's part of the simplicity, like get out of the user's way, help them get things done quickly. Security, obviously critical, right? If users are afraid to use the web, that's a big problem. And so Chrome has always invested very heavily in making sure that the Chromium project is highly secure. And stability. Again, this comes back to user frustration and annoyance. The Chromium project believes strongly in having a highly stable, reliable browser. So to me, the central theme of both this early work and our ongoing journey in the Chromium project is really transforming the web browser from being just an application to being a full operating system that adheres to the principles of good operating system design that have been worked out over the past 50 years. It's kind of funny how we kind of keep discovering some of these same things, like the site isolation project realized, oh, you know what, actually it's pretty important to have memory safety, protecting the address spaces of different origins that don't necessarily trust each other. Of course, when the Spectre attack came out, that became suddenly extremely urgent. But that's just, core operating system design philosophy. So from that sense, it shouldn't be, from that lens, it shouldn't be a surprise that Chromium grew into a full OS project pretty quickly. Chromium OS was released in November 19th, 2009, so just shortly after the Chrome browser was released. And early on, we struggled with the same questions that we do still today to some degree. What is web? What's an app? How do we make an operating system that is simple yet powerful? And so this is what Chrome OS looked like at launch. It was just a full screen browser window, nothing else, and proudly so. And this is the CR48. In fact, I have one right here. And it still boots, at least it did a minute ago. Yeah, it's running Chrome 58, so it's a little out of date. I don't actually connect it to my Wi-Fi, but I like to keep it around anyway. This is the first Chrome OS device that was ever launched. It was launched in December 2010. And at the time, there really wasn't much interest. The general sense was, well, if it's just the web, it's not a real computer. I think in the 10 years since then, I think we've shown that something that runs just the web can very much be a real computer. And so anyway, at the time in 2010, Google designed these devices ourselves and handed them out for free just to get the market going. And now fast forward to today, there's lots of different Chrome OS devices available on the market from Lenovo, Asus, HP, Acer, and Google. And they do quite well in schools as well as other markets. It really goes back to the simplicity, trying to make computing as simple as possible. There's so much more to tell about Chromium history. Hopefully you're going to hear more for the next few days. I also highly recommend the Chrome Comics file. If people haven't found it, you can click on this link or just Google it. I've got a paper copy myself, which I just grabbed off a shelf when I saw a stack in the Google Mountain View office once. It does a great job telling the story of why Google invested in Chrome. And I think it's from what I've seen from inside, it's quite honest. I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy, some of the stuff in there, but I think it's pretty accurate. For other history, Sam already mentioned there's some great talks coming up, not Chromium per se, but Chris Wilson's talk on the history of the web is really great. Highly recommend it. And I'm personally really looking forward to Vince Cerf's talk on the history of internet. I haven't heard him give a talk like that before, so it should be a lot of fun. All right, let's move on to talking a little bit about the project goals for Chromium. This is tricky because different contributors to Chromium are going to have different goals. And so perhaps we're going to hear about the different goals that different contributors have throughout this event. So I can't really talk about Chromium project goals particularly well. Instead, I'm going to touch on Google's goals with Chromium. And so Google has three main goals for Chrome. First, Google's business really depends on a strong open web ecosystem. And so a top priority for Google in investing in Chrome and the Chromium project is to help the open web be healthy and strong. But of course, at Google, we also want Chrome to be the best browser it can be. And so it doesn't mean that we don't like people working on other browsers. We think competition is great, but we also shouldn't kid ourselves. We want Chrome to be a great browser. And as we've already discussed, Google considers it in our interest for computing to be generally as simple as using the web. And so that's our third big goal, and that's manifested in Chrome OS. And there's an interesting interplay between these three. You can almost argue that these three goals together are more powerful than any one on its own. For example, if we were just investing in the web platform, for example, as Google did with Firefox early on, it's hard to advance the web without also having a browser product that can really be the manifestation of what you believe the web can be. At the same time, there's not much point in having a browser product if the web platform itself is struggling and losing relevance, right? And so we need these, investing in having a great browser and making the web great are complementary, as is working on devices that really showcase what the web can be as a first-class citizen on a computing device. Now, there's a really interesting strategic question here that we talk a lot about. What's the strategic trade-offs for Google investing as Chromium as open source? It's interesting to go through all the trade-offs, and this is a super complex and nuanced question. I could talk about it for hours, and I'd be happy to. But for me, I think the best summary is still the last few pages of the Chrome comic book. Again, I encourage you to read it. But at a high level, it's that Google has a real strategic interest in a strong and healthy web. And we know that can only be achieved through collaboration and healthy competition. And so investing via open source is a means to kind of, as a forcing function, to help achieve that collaboration and healthy competition to make the web as a whole stronger. All right, I want to talk a little bit about how I see culture and values within the Chromium project. And like I said, there's different people are going to have different perspectives on this. We should all talk about it. Don't take what I say necessarily as gospel. But I've been around for a while and worked on some different teams, and I think there's some common trends. First of all, really core to our culture, I believe, is the idea of inclusion. The web's superpower is its reach, the fact that it's available to everyone on every device, more or less. And we can't have a universally accessible platform if we're not, and we can't make that thrive if we aren't constantly striving ourselves to be more inclusive and to have our project better represent the diversity of our user base. We spend a lot of time on this inside of Google, including events focused specifically on promoting diversity and inclusion and helping all of us to be more empathetic. Unfortunately, given the sensitivity of the topic and the vulnerability that participants feel when discussing some of these topics, these have been Google-only events that we've done. Perhaps we should brainstorm together a little about how we can do more of this openly and with the larger community. But regardless, I think hopefully it's clear to folks contributing to the project that diversity and inclusion are a part of the project culture. Some of Google's research and material on this is available publicly, and I've linked to it here. And of course, there's tons of other great material on this. This is really something the entire software industry is investing a lot in. And I want to acknowledge that open source work in particular is hard. It requires putting yourself out there and taking risks. And if we're going to succeed, we've got to support each other. We've got to work to bring each other up. I still remember how I joined Google as a relatively experienced software engineer. But my first year or two, I had a lot of imposter syndrome. And I remember how one kind of kind and supportive comment from a Chromium leader who I looked up to really made me feel so much more welcome in my first year. And it's funny, mentioning it to them years later, they couldn't even remember. They're like, oh, what? I said what? I was like, yeah, it really made a difference for me when I felt included and welcomed, that you valued my contribution. And so that, that's mattered a lot for me. And it's important for us all to remember how scary and risky it can be for folks contributing for the first time, or trying to build up their own involvement in the project. And I want to be clear that you will make mistakes in this, and your mistakes will probably be permanently and publicly recorded for everyone to see forever. It's okay. Take a deep breath, own up to your mistakes and learn from them. I try to do this myself. I've made plenty of mistakes. I've said a lot of stupid things in public that I regret. And I just, I'm okay. I give myself the freedom to make mistakes as long as I'm learning from them and being honest about them. Okay, and that brings me to talking about our code of conduct. The Chromium project has a code of conduct that we're pretty serious about. We expect that everyone is going to act in a way that's respectful and constructive, and ask that you really assume good intent from the people you're working with. Right? People don't come to this project, to cause trouble. Right? For the most part, people are here because they really have something that they believe is a value that they want to try to get done. And so, yeah, it's important that you assume good intent from the people that you're working with. We want to keep debate about code and what technology should do and what the right design is really healthy. We have to support open, critical debate, but we got to keep the debate focused on the tech and on things that can be objective and studied and not be critical of people, right? And to that end, harassment in the Chromium project in any form is not tolerated. We have, if you see anything that seems concerning or you have any questions on this, please email community@chromium.org. We've got a bunch of tools available to us to help make sure that the Chromium project is really a welcoming, inclusive, and respectful place for people to work. Also, there's a lot of things there's a lot of different values that people care about who contribute to Chromium. Last year at our BlinkOn conference, BlinkOn is a bit more of a deep dive into the web platform parts of Chromium. And so last year when I gave the keynote for that, I surveyed the audience and asked people to rank different values that I knew were important to people. And there was a big list, and this is a small sample size. I think we only had about 50 people reply, but I suspect there's a pretty strong overlap between what matters most to that community and what matters to the Chromium community at large. Note that the one that came out as #1 as being kind of universally strongly supported, or near universally, is supporting openness of the web platform. You know, the fact that the web is open is really what makes it special, and I think lots of us feel that quite strongly. And to me, this work means investing and working collaboratively across organizations, acting transparently and sharing information publicly whenever possible, and being honest and humble in our efforts. All right, I want to go over just a few tips. You know, there's a million things we could talk about, but I tried to pick out a few things. First of all, it's really common, especially in open source work, for discussions to get tense. And in my experience, tension arises most often from undercommunication and a real lack of trust or relationship building. And so first and foremost, like for any collaborative project, you really have to invest intentionally in your relationships and in great communication. And so communicate about what you're doing and why, right? Don't just jump in and try to get something done. You know, make sure that on bugs, for example, you've got some context of why is this important? Why does this matter? Why are you investing in this? Use the mailing list processes that we have to try to share ideas for bigger changes, right? Intent to prototype on Blink Dev for new web platform features, or intent to implement on Chromium Dev for like big architectural changes to Chromium. And try to engage, try to find allies who have overlapping goals with yours, and be honest in recognizing when your goals might be at odds with those of others, and just try to work through those. Outside of global pandemics, I generally recommend people travel where possible to work with coworkers and attend conferences for relationship building with colleagues. For example, in web platform, BlinkOn and W3C's TPAC event are really high value for relationship building. And outside of travel, you know, hopefully we'll be doing that again before too long. But when an email or code review gets tense or overly time consuming, you might want to try to move to a higher bandwidth communication medium, you know, Slack, or, you know, even suggest getting on a video conference. I've seen too many month-long debates over email where people's emotions were getting all fired up that were resolved in less than 30 minutes in a meeting by realizing that there was a gap in communication. So err on the side of over communication. Also recognize that contributors are all over the world and work all sorts of hours. General rule of thumb when actively engaging with someone in the project, for example, on a code review, is to give them up to a business day to respond. But then after that, if you haven't gotten a response within a business day, it's okay to ping. Recognize that different people in different organizations have different priorities. We all care about fostering this open source community, but we also have to make tough trade-offs with how we spend our time. Nope. It's worth realizing that there's really no one, as far as I know, in the whole project who's actually like getting paid to review patches, right? It's not really what we're paid to do. Those of us who are lucky enough to be paid to work on Chromium are paid to make browsers meaningfully better for users and developers. And many of us just believe that fostering an open source community of like-minded people is a high leverage way to do that long term. But it's always tough to prioritize your time for maximum value to the project. In code reviews, remember there's no sacred cows. That means don't assume that anything is the way it is for a good reason. Question if something doesn't make sense or can be improved, and take the initiative. If you see something is broken or can be improved, speak up and critically listen to others, and then try to fix it. If you show a willingness to understand the perspectives of other contributors and invest in doing the right thing for the long-term health of the project, others will be more willing to invest in helping you. And finally, ask questions. I talked about the importance of communication. Great communication depends much more on listening and reading than on speaking and writing, right? Seek first to understand before seeking to be understood. Okay, those are a few random tips. I wanted to list just some of the key communication forums for those of you that are new. Hopefully you know about the huge plethora of mailing lists that we have. And it's always helpful to try to find the most specific forum for the topic you want to discuss. Lists like Chromium Dev and Blink Dev now are so massive. I've not been able to keep up with those lists myself for some time. I know other people struggle as well. And so it's always easier to build up relationships and create trust in smaller, more focused communities. So look for the list that is really most specific to the topic you want to discuss. And if you get it wrong, that's okay. Other people might suggest another forum. Slack is great for real-time chat. We've got an active Slack with lots of different channels and all sorts of different topics. Take a look at the link there for details. Twitter some of us believe that Twitter is actually a really effective communication tool for collaborating on moving the web platform forward. Many of us also believe that Twitter is a caustic, toxic place that's not suited to nuanced discussion. I think both are probably true. So if you find that you can get more value than frustration out of it, then I encourage you to engage in meaningful dialogue on Twitter. If not, I encourage you to ignore it. And then finally, events like this are really critical for communication. There's BlinkOn. It's not all Google events. Agalia hosts this awesome WebEdge Hackfest once a year, generally when we're not in pandemic. And so look for opportunities to meet with and collaborate with folks working on the project. Few additional resources. Hopefully everyone here already knows about the Chromium website, where you should be able to find most useful things, but there's a lot there. It can be hard to keep track of. There's Life of a Chromium Developer, which is just an overview to working in the project. There's a lot of mechanics there. I didn't want to spend time in this talk going through those. And then we have a lot of recorded videos from some prior Chrome University events, but also our BlinkOn conferences. I think those are all on the BlinkOn channel on YouTube, so check those out. And of course, the next 3 days, please take good advantage of the time that we all have together for the next few days and use it to learn about the folks who are working on similar things as you are. And with that, let's move to Q&A. So can we bring the questions up? Hopefully we've got a bunch by now. One question so far, so this might be quick. Is there a list of the mailing lists you would all recommend joining? Yep, so the link that I had there in the slides was to the, and if you Google it, it's the Chromium technical discussion lists. If you put that into your favorite search engine, there's a page with a long list of lists. Hopefully they're all there. If you are the owner of a mailing list about Chromium that isn't there, please add it. But that's really the best place to get to find all the different discussion lists. Do we have any other questions on the Slido, or should we leave it there? All right, I guess that's all we've got, so we can break a little bit early, and we'll have a break, and then we'll be back in about 15 minutes with the rest of the programming. Thanks, everybody.